The world of chess analysis is growing bigger and bigger, with people analyzing normal humane things with chess terms, and Boris breaking the 100 video barrier, and it's hard to come up with something new. So I was browsing through YouTube and I saw this thumbnail, and it gave me this idea. I'm continuing to analyze chess in movies. Today's topic is ChessKid thumbnails, and the first thing that we're looking at is this type of thumbnail. It was actually used 4 times, and it's obviously just drawn even though some titles suggest otherwise. And 4 other thumbnails contain a slightly different position, but basically the same. Oh, and the boards are 5x6. Okay, here we have a more interesting 4x6 board position, which keeps getting away from a square shape. Pawn is on the first rank, black's in double check, but black wins after king takes rook, and that pawn secures a victory as the queen maneuver traps the bishop, which wins because white doesn't even have a king. Ridiculous. The first position we encounter with normal board is this one, and the kings and queens swapped places. We have to do a lot of imagining, but based on some empty squares in the title, I was able to come up with this game. Push, 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 and takes, but white doesn't take back and instead pushes, weakening the d1 a4 diagonal, and black utilizes that with a queen, tries to bring the bishop, and after white ignores it, black mates. This thumbnail looks similar, as well as the back rank mate 1 and the rest that I'm showing now. Okay, now we'll have something useful with this trap against the Caro-Kann. So it's the 2 knights, and you kick out the bishop, then h4, and bishop back, queen h5, and after they block mate, you threaten another one. And after they block, queen e2 is a really tricky move. And in this case, black blunders immediately because knight f7, winning a rook. And on the thumbnail, we see the position after takes, queen check and checkmate. Then there is the Scandinavian fool's mate most famous variation, which occurs after the Barnes opening. And now we encounter the Frankenstein-Dracula opening, which features a center fork. So it starts with the Vienna, bishop c4, and knight takes pawn. If you recapture, it's a fork. So white frequently tries bishop f7, but here, don't be afraid to take. The king is pretty safe on g8, and after this mysterious pawn push, don't take the knight and blunder mate, but take the pawn, just develop, place your queen on the 7th rank for defending, and you're fine with an extra pawn. So the higher rated players will play a tricky queen h5 threatening mate, knight d6 only move, and if queen takes pawn, winning it back, you just trade the queens and have an equal position. The trick that white can play here is bishop back, but don't worry, you can just go bishop e7, get normal development, and this is an even position. I don't recommend playing any other lines here, and it's a pretty fun opening, but our next thumbnail features a 2x8 board, and I'm just wondering, what was the starting position? Alright, here black should take the pawn, be sure to not stalemate the king, bring the bishop closer, step the king out of the way, and checkmate white. Then we are shown a queen and a rook chasing down the king, then the scholar's mate, which of course no one falls for. And I actually discovered that in this position, after you castled, you can play d5, sacrifice another center pawn, jump the knight to get the bishop, and here you can take back immediately, because the rook pin or bring the rook first. If they try to defend the pawn chain, you can sacrifice the knight, check, get back a center pawn, save the queen, threaten theirs with a bishop, and after they deflect and force back 2 of your pieces, you are winning. Pretty wild. They get the starting position right, and this thumbnail refers to a position like this, where they either stalemate or you run the king and draw. Then this interesting position in thumbnail with world champion Gukesh D, and let's see it. It was played at the 2021 Grand Prix, and here after white jumps the knight, Gukesh aims at the outpost, goes there, after which white has to find knight f5 with the idea of check, but white retreats immediately, and Gukesh makes it 3 with knight e5 attacking the queen, and then plays a fascinating sacrifice, knight f3. If white takes with the pawn, white loses the queen, so knight takes was played, but pawn takes twice, bring the bishop, sack the dark square and to open up the king, white sacks it back, but after rook h1 their best try is giving up the rook and it's over. Gukesh was already playing like that 3 years ago. The next position talks about the humane feeling often overwhelming the computer evaluation. So I loaded this position into Stockfish, and it shows a slight advantage for white, finding this line where they win a pawn by sacrificing the knight and getting it back, trading and getting a6. It's equal, but black needs to be careful to stop the passed pawn. But they also have a trick. If white tries to defend e3 the normal way, it just gets taken, and black is even better here. So h3, and now black can't take, because white has a sneaky tactic. Rook f6, sacrificing a rook, and knight d5, attacking the rook, and e7 fork at the same time, and white gets back the rook, messing up the kingside structure. The Harry Potter chess scene is well known and is my most successful video for a reason. So-called bad move against the Sicilian is bishop c4 cause e6 just blocks the diagonal entirely. I agree that you rather shouldn't play this, but it's not bad, it barely loses a tempo. Alright, the next thumbnail features a famous Legali trap. There's not much to talk about here. After this bishop pin, you can take a gamble. If they take the queen, you win by this checkmate. If they take the knight with knight, you lose. So the modernized legal trap was created, where after h3, the bishop is no longer defended by the knight, and you can just take it and get back a piece by this fork. The prime example of the exchange sacrifice is this position where it's the only winning move, and black either gets an extra rook, which is enough to mate, or promotes. A bishop against 3 pawns is usually a draw, especially when the king and pawns are close to their home squares. You just lock up the squares with the same color as the bishop and easily draw. If the pawns are as far advanced as this, then white has enough tempos to chase down the bishop and then promote a pawn by carefully sacrificing 2 others in the process. But again, usually it's a draw. The next thumbnail displays a bishop being trapped in the Ruy Lopez, and the trick is interesting. In the Morphy defense, you kick out the bishop 1 move later, filling that break with d6, and then you hope for d4, because then you take with the knight. Now, if they do anything but not taking the pawn immediately, it's around equal. But if queen takes, then the bishop gets trapped after c5, and c4. The trap is called Noah's Ark. In the next segment of the video, we'll talk about this common trap where you feed the knight the outflank pawn to push bishop's pawn and trap it, just like here, where it wins you the endgame. The England gambit only has one trick, and that's trapping the queen, but you can just play knight c3 defending, or e3 blocking the bishop, and win. They show the Caro-Kann in French correctly, with the idea of both openings being giving up the center in the first moves, but then breaking in with d5 and c5. The Arabian mate is a mating pattern performed by the knight and rook, with the horse defending the rook, and the square adjacent to the king, and the rook mating, just like here. I've shown the classical hook mate in my UK versus India video, but white trades the pieces off thinking they got out of the attack. They underestimate the rook c8 move, and the rook infiltrates. The bishop attacks after being attacked. Black castles and white tries to escort their king to safety, but they get a knight check and f5. The rook infiltrates. Black wins a piece. White, in desperation, blunders mate in 1. And in July, I have even mistaken the pattern for the Arabian mate, but it's a hook, because the rook is in the back and a third piece supporting the attack on those diagonal squares is required. In this fascinating position, knight c4 move is actually best, because if you take, the rook is trapped, and if you retreat with the queen, white gets crazy activity and at least wins a pawn and an exchange. Here, e5 is in fact a blunder, as it allows back rank mate, and obviously a rook check leads to a draw, because they either wander or you step off the first rank, easily drawing the position. Oh, and the a1 square is a light one. Next position again includes a light h8, so a1 square as well, and I don't get why they think it's an intermediate move. Sure, it's usually a check, that's the only maneuver here, but of course, black is winning in this strange, really strange situation. In this one, black can just show the shrinking rectangle technique of mating with a king and a rook. Here, I created this position where the only drawing move is trading the rooks. In 12-year-old master crushes NBA player blindfolded, Grant blunders his bishop early on and eventually loses to queen e3 mate. Another game featuring that same prodigy is this one, where we see the following opening position. We have the whole game, so we'll analyze it from the beginning. It starts with the Sicilian Alapin queen takes, which is called barman defense. The knights are brought out, after which we arrive at next positioning. Now white plays bishop c4, kicking out the queen. White doubles their own pawns. There were 2 better moves, which are bishop takes queen, going into this simplification. Black has an extra pawn, but white has some fighting chances, and queen takes, which again gets white an isolated pawn, while black doesn't have one, and black's up a pawn. But pawn takes and queen check, black takes on c3, rook b1, and white just looks crushed. The king has no castling rights. The pawn structure is absolutely horrible. White's down 2 pawns. Black went on to win a game. At first, I wanted to try and recreate this position, but then I saw a white king amongst the captured pieces and changed my mind. While on the thumbnail of the next video, you can barely see anything. It is referring to this situation where 2 of black's pieces are hanging, but here black plays queen a5, just aiming for checkmate, so white makes breathing room and black saves the knight via check, saves the bishop, and that's it. The next position is taken from David Bronstein's game, and here his opponent, playing with black, pins down the queen and takes the rook, after which white pushes the pawn, scaring out the queen, and plays king up, attacking the bishop, and now queen c5 and queen h4 lead to a really complicated position. Instead, black plays bishop c5, saving it that way, knight e4 attacking it, knight d7 defends, and rook c1. Here, e6 was more precise, as bishop takes trade, queen exchange with the bishop checking, gets blocked by the knight. Here, white has a piece, positional advantages, and a bishop pair for a rook. Instead, rook c1 was played, which is excellent, and then Bronstein sacrifices it for a bishop to check with the knight, threaten mate, and after the queen check, if he went, let's say, king f2, absolute craziness would happen, with black sacrificing a knight, and white attacking, with those three also giving up the knight, queen trade, and white eventually getting a bishop and a pawn for the rook, plus those two connected passed pawns. King e3 was actually the only move which white found. Now h5 and white sacrifices a knight, but it's forced mate unless black gives up the queen. And here, after a couple of checks, Bronstein rubs his king forward, eventually gets to e6, and of course, he won this game. The Alekhine's gun is a famous weapon which is often devastating, like in this position where Alekhine was playing white. So he plays bishop a4 with the idea of pushing b5, so black pushes b5 itself. Therefore, he takes bishop back, and black runs the king forward. And now h4 creates a zugzwang. The knight is pinned both ways, and all the other pieces protect it, and the rook behind it. So after the pawn pushes, white can just gallop the horse over the board as black gives up the knight and the game. The clearance tactic is showcased here where Lanier Dominguez and Fabiano Caruana arrive in this position. Lanier sacrifices the pawn to open lines, and if Fabi was to take, then white would have a strong attack with mate threatened. Here, Caruana should have traded the queens, and this is drawn. However, he plays f6, allowing the attack to happen, but it's really hard to convert, and even Dominguez couldn't do it, and it eventually ended in a draw. In the Greek gift, you actually give up the bishop and not the knight. You can only utilize when those criteria are met. The queen and knight can check if they accept the sacrifice. The pawn is only defended by the king. So, in this position, white executes the Greek gift and knight check. It's important to go forward with black. Now white threatens a discovery. Here rook h3 preventing bishop blocks, and white wins 4 pawns for that bishop and is winning. The National Festival thumbnail contains 3 positions. One of those is the starting one, and in this one, taking the knight and then the rook is best. If they try to save the rook, white is still winning. However, in the thumbnail we see that bishop takes rook was played, which gives black a better position, because here you can quickly get mated. And if you find the only move, you are still losing. And the third one isn't special at all. White is just up a piece. Thanks for watching through my longest video yet. If you liked the video, like the video, subscribe so I update the channel banner. Merry Christmas!